What is going on, YouTube? How are y'all doing today? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, we're doing our AFC South predictions. It's been a little bit since we've done one of these. Took a little bit of a break, doing some quizzes and things like that, so I hope you all enjoyed that. But without further ado, let's just get straight into it. I don't really want to waste time. This is one of the more interesting divisions for me. Although, well, for two of the teams. For other two, it's kind of not that much to say, but let's just get straight into it. Starting with the Tennessee Titans. They lost A.J. Brown. The trade in the draft was obviously a very questionable one at the time, and I still think it's a very questionable trade at the time. They got Robert Woods and Treylon Burks to hopefully replace his production. Austin Hooper's also a very okay tight end, although he did have a problem with drops last season. He's a solid tight end who was a Pro Bowl tight end, or near Pro Bowl caliber a couple years ago. I think the Titans are a very underrated team. You know, a lot of people think that they're not going to be as good this season, and I thought that even for a time until I did some research and I figured out last season they actually were one of the best, if not the best teams. I don't remember. I think it was 8 wins against teams with above 500 records and that ended the season with above 500 as a record. So they were very good against quality teams last year, which is why I'm not really worried about them this year for as tough of a schedule as they have. I think they'll do just fine. With Derrick Henry coming back fully healthy, they should be good. They didn't really. I tried looking at what they lost. They didn't lose much to me. So with that said, let's just get into it. With the Giants at home, should be a pretty easy win. The Giants are a very bad football team. They don't do anything particularly well, so I have no issues there with them winning that. And the Bills, they go on the road, and I think this is a much tougher game. And I think that obviously, and I think they could win this. For sure, because Derrick Henry and the Titans have just been able to play really well against the Bills as of recent. They beat them last year in overtime. But I'm going to have to give it to the Bills because it's on the road, and also the Bills are just, to me, the best team in football. So I think it's definitely close, but probably going to see the Bills coming out with that win there. And then they got the Raiders, who this should be also another very good game, but since it's at home, I'm going to have to give them the win there. The Raiders are a good football team who could probably beat some of these top echelon teams, but I don't know. They have a little bit of missing pieces on that defense still. I'm still a little concerned about the run stopping game over there, but the pass rush should be better over there. So maybe it'll mess with Tannehill a little bit when he's passing. You never know. So that should be a very interesting game there. And then they're going to go on the road to take on the Colts, and I think this is going to be a loss here. Last year, I think they swept the Colts, but this year I think it's going to be a split. Spoiler alert for a couple predictions in the second year. But I think it's going to be a split because the Colts this season have Matt Ryan, who is definitely better than Carson Wentz, but by how much is the question. I guess we'll save that question for, I'll save the answer for when we get to the Colts here and later in this video. Obviously, it can go either way. It's always with the Colts. It's always a close between those two. I don't think it's going to be a sweep this year, though, so I think they're going to catch an L there. And then they go on the road again to Washington to take on the Commanders. I think this should be a pretty easy win. The Commanders are very not good. Chase Young to me is one of the most overrated players in the league. Before he got injured last season, I think he only had like two sacks? So, not anywhere near his rookie season. And not saying that he can't still be a star or anything. It's just I think his impact is very overrated, and he's definitely not a top defensive player yet. So I think they should be able to get the win pretty easy there, even though Carson Wentz is there. Should be a very interesting game, though. And then they go at home and take on the Colts, as I mentioned already. I think it's going to be a split, so I think they'll get a W there. You could reverse who wins where. They could maybe both win on the road, or maybe one of them can actually get swept. I have no idea, honestly, with these teams, because they play so tough against each other. Last year, the Colts almost won, and then the first game. Well, not really. I don't remember. I think the Titans might have won by like 10, actually. But the second game, for sure, I remember the Colts were up by a lot, and then the Titans came back and won that game because the Colts kind of choked the game away. You know, Carson Wentz fumbling, throwing interceptions, all that stuff. But should be a very fun series. I definitely am going to watch those games when they come on. If the Steelers aren't playing, of course, I'll definitely be watching those games. You can bet on that. Then they're going on the road to play against the Texans. I think they get the W there. The Texans are not very good, obviously, but I do think they're a little better than people give them credit for. I actually think they're better than the Jaguars, and you'll see that later on. But should be a pretty easy win for the Titans. At the same time, though, they do sometimes lose to the Texans. I believe they lost to them last season. Or no, they almost lost to them last season. Or did they? I don't remember. But the Texans did beat the Chargers, so I guess they can beat anybody. I do know in the end of the season last year they did struggle to play against the Texans in the Week 18 matchup. So you never know. That could potentially go either way. I have no idea, honestly. And then you got the Chiefs on the road. This should be a very, very good game, but I've mentioned previously, many times before, the Titans are very good against the Chiefs, especially the last couple seasons. Their only loss, I believe, was in that AFC Championship game back in 2020, I think it was. But other than that, I'm pretty sure they've beaten them every single time they played. They smoked them last year, obviously. And I don't know. I just think the Titans are a better team than the Chiefs. Their defense is for sure better to me. Offense, you could argue, but I don't know. I think both teams are pretty solid and well coached and things like that. So it could go either way. It's an Arrowhead. It's always a tough place to play, but I'm going to give it to the Titans because the Titans just have a very good record against the Chiefs recently. And if it wasn't for that, I'd probably pick the Chiefs, but it is what it is. Next up, they got the Broncos. This is a very, very, very tough game to predict here. Because I believe last time they played was before, obviously, when they had a good QB. So, can't really base it off that. Very, very tough. I think the Titans get it, though. I just... It's not that I don't believe in the Broncos' offense. It's just I feel like the Broncos' offense needs to prove itself first. Because I'm not saying... Look. I'm not saying that the offense is going to work. I think the offense is going to work. But, there is a small, minute chance that the offense doesn't work out and the QB wasn't their only need. I'm just saying there is that chance yet because we haven't seen them with a good QB yet. And their offenses in the past haven't typically been well coached either, or just good in general. But I think that's obviously going to change with Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson there. But they have a lot more to prove, I feel like, than the Titans' defense has to prove because the Titans' defense is good. It's a pretty good defense. So, and also Derrick Henry is better than Javonte Williams as much as I think Javonte Williams is a stud. Derrick Henry's Derrick Henry. So I think just there I'm going to have to pick probably just the better running back or the better defense because the defense from the Broncos last year was not as good as it usually is, but it still wasn't bad. So I'm just going to have to give it to the Titans because I know this is a very tough stretch of games that they're getting because they were able to beat the Chiefs, Broncos, and the Colts all in a very recent time, which could seem unrealistic to some, but I think it's very realistic because, like I said, last season they had 8 wins against above 500 teams. So, yeah, they were pretty good against teams like that, and they did play them in very close stretches together, so I think they should be able to win those games there. At this point, they'll be sitting at, 7-2, number one in the conference probably, or around there. But from that point on, I think they're going to get on a little bit of a losing streak here. They're going to go on the road to play the Green Bay Packers. I think that's a loss there. The Packers are a good team. Their defense should be very good. They're nothing insane by any means, but they're definitely a good enough team to beat teams like the Titans. Just having Aaron Rodgers on your team alone is enough. Christian Watson, I believe, they drafted in the second round, I'm pretty sure. I don't remember when, but he got drafted. He's a pretty okay receiver. I don't really know, though, any of their other wide receivers. I think they still have MVS? I'm pretty sure they do. I don't know. He went off to Kansas City. Yeah, I don't remember who's really on that receiving core. I'll have to look that up a little bit, but I don't remember necessarily. But I don't know. I just think that the Titans will be a little bit tired. They'll be on a 5-game win streak at that point. They'll have played, looks like, a bunch of road games in the past 5 weeks. They've played 3 out of their last 5 on the road. They'll be tired having to go back on the road again to play the Packers. So I think they'll take a loss there. And then continuing with that, I think they're going to take a loss too to the Bengals as well because the Bengals are just a very good team. I don't think they're going to be insane because they only went 10-7 last year, and the Bengals themselves have a very tough schedule as well. But I think the Bengals will be a lot more well rested, especially since they have a much more potent offense than the Titans. You can pass to 3 to 4 different people with the Titans. Robert Woods, we have to hope he stays healthy. You have Treylon Burks, who we don't know how good he's going to be. Austin Hooper, same thing, even though he's a veteran a little bit. So I just think I'm going to go with the more potent offense there, as well as the offensive line on the Bengals being a lot better. So I'm going to have to give that one to the Bengals there. And then also an L for the Titans and a W for the Eagles. Because the Eagles, I think, are going to be very good next year. They had a very great offseason, obviously getting A.J. Brown for almost nothing. Very good for them. I don't remember who else they got. They got Hassan Reddick to help with their pass rush. That's very helpful for them. And I just think they match up very well against the Titans. The Titans, I don't remember how good they were stopping the run, but the Eagles had the number one rushing offense in the league last year with Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, and I believe Jordan Howard was there, but I could be wrong about that. Devonta Smith is a very underrated wide receiver, so pairing him with A.J. Brown should be very solid. I think it's a very winnable game for the Titans, but I'm going to have to give that one to the Eagles. And something of the Jags, that should be easy. The Jags are very bad, not a very good team. Self-explanatory for why I think that. But a more interesting game coming up is against the Chargers on the road. I think the Titans will get the W there. The Titans are, like I said, I'm really holding on to. I'm going to live and die by that statement until the season is over, on the Titans being the number one team or number one of the top teams last year against top teams. I think they're capable of doing that. They're just Mike Vrabel is that good of a coach. Derrick Henry is that good of a player, and sometimes Ryan Tannehill can be that good of a game manager that he can lead you past teams like this and get you more dubs than you probably should. So I think they'll get the W there, although it could go either way. And then they got the Texans. That should be a W. The Texans, like I said, maybe they get the W if they're lucky, but I don't think they do. It's the Texans. Not much more to say there. And then you got a more interesting game at home against the Cowboys, and I think they're going to take a loss there, mostly because I just think the team is going to, I guess, spoiler for the last game here, we're going to go 11-6, and the Cowboys here in this stretch are the team that I could see them losing to the most, because the Cowboys have a very great offense, of course, and the Titans' defense is definitely really good and probably could slow them down, but I just think that the Titans' mixture of offense and defense overpowers the Cowboys, because the Cowboys, they have Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs, who's actually not a good corner. He's not a good coverage corner, but he's very good at getting turnovers sometimes. And I think the Titans will be, and in that case, you could argue the Titans can exploit that. I just think that the Cowboys' offense is so high-powered that they'll be able to get the W there. And considering that I'm personally a guy who thinks that if you go on too long of a streak, you're eventually going to lose. We've seen it with teams like the Steelers, and last year at the Cardinals, it happens. You can't stay on too long of streaks. So I think that they're going to take their loss there before catching a W against the Jaguars and finishing the season 11-6, which I think is probably a reasonable expectation for them. Okay. Looking at worst case scenario and best case scenario. Let's start with the worst case scenario. I could see them dropping to the Raiders and the Chiefs. Raiders and Chiefs, and also as well the Broncos. I think those other games though are all pretty I think that those are all going to be W's. So at worst case scenario, you're looking at like 8 and 9. If you really want to get technical, you could also say the Chargers too, to go to 7 and 10. But I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think 7 and 10 is a reasonable floor expectation for them, because I think they're too good to finish with 7 and 10. And on the flip side, which I think is a little bit more of a reasonable expectation, but at the same time just a bit too high of an expectation in my opinion, is their ceiling. And in terms of their ceiling, I can see them beating the Packers as well as sweeping the Colts and going to 13-4. They're a very good team. Their defense is good. Their offense hasn't really suffered too much outside of A.J. Brown. So I think they're going to be very solid this season. I don't understand why everyone thinks they're not going to be very good. Or at least not better than the Colts, so I think the Colts are the more overrated team more so than the Titans. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Let's move on to the next team, which is the Jacksonville Jaguars. A lot of acquisitions this year. Obviously, Trayvon Walker in the draft. They spent a lot of money on players that they probably shouldn't have, like Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, who, let me just say right now, if they were signed to a much better deal, Christian Kirk maybe like a 3-year, $20 million deal, something like that, which I think would be a steal for someone like him. If they sign up for that, I think it would be amazing. Zay Jones, same thing. If it was like a cheap deal, which I actually don't remember his contract, but I know Christian Kirk is obviously insane. I would be fine with that. Although they are definitely overpaid, people need to still understand that these are still upgrades. Although they are overpaid, it's not like it's detrimental. It's not making the team worse in terms of play on the field. Is it making it worse in terms of the financial situation and their free agency market potentially next year? Absolutely. But I don't see how that's going to actually mess up the play on the field as long as they continue to play at the level that they were on their previous teams, in which case I'm expecting them to. Urban Meyer getting out of there is just such a big upgrade for them. Just getting anybody other than him was obviously going to make things work better. I don't think they're going to be as much better than last season, but they should be by a little bit. So let's get started with that. Starting up, we got the Commanders on the road. I think this should be a very solid game, and a game that's very winnable for the Jaguars. But I don't think they're going to, because the Jaguars usually don't win in Week 1, unless it's against the Colts at home, which I'm just going to spoil right here. They get the W there. They literally have always beaten them at home. which within the past, like, I think it's 2014 was the last time that the Colts beat the Jaguars in Jacksonville. It's been a long time. So I think that streak will continue to go. Obviously, every streak is meant to be broken, so I would not be surprised even in the slightest if the Colts won. But one thing I do want to say is everyone, Carson Wentz kind of chokes games away. You picked Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, who to stop choking. I'm just going to leave it at that. Next up, we got the Chargers and the Eagles. We're just going to get those out of the way. Both losses. What can I say? They're just heavily outclassed. No particular historical edge over these teams. Just outclassed. Texans is a much less game where they're much less outclassed, but I think they're still going to take an L there because I think the Texans are a better team. Davis Mills had a very good rookie season, in my opinion. Not the best, of course, but definitely a decent rookie season considering the situation that he was in. So I think they'll get the Texans will get the W there. Colts will get their revenge and they'll beat the Jaguars on the second time around. They did that last year, of course. The first game was when it was in Indy. They won. I don't know if it was a blowout or not, but I'm pretty sure they won by like 15. And then, of course, the Week 18 matchup, which was honestly, if I'm as a Steelers fan, I gotta say I wouldn't have been too mad if the Colts won and we missed the playoffs. But you know what? It is what it is. There was a 10-minute period where we were winning the game, so that's all. Or a 2-minute period where we were winning the game. That's all I care about. Maybe a little happy for a couple minutes, okay? Big Ben went out on top for 2 minutes in a playoff game. Anyways, moving on. They go back home in Jacksonville to play the Giants, who I think that's a win because the Giants just aren't good at anything. I look at the Giants and I don't. What do the Giants do well? What star players do they have? Kenny Galladay, I don't know. We have to see him play first. He was injured and didn't get a single touchdown last season. I don't know. I need to see him play. Saquon Barkley. I don't like Saquon. Why does everybody keep saying he's good? You know how many yards he rushed for last year? And I believe it was in 13 games. 563. I'm pretty sure it was the exact number. Might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less. It was around the 500 mark. Why is he getting so much praise for being a starter? Last year, he was not injured for that long. 13 games is a lot of games. So 500 yards is not going to cut it. I really don't like Saquon. I'm sorry. I understand his injuries have derailed his career. And I have no doubt that if he didn't get injured as much as he did, he would have been a very good football player. But as it is right now, he didn't have a lot of injuries this year. And whether or not he's a changed guy, some players are able to bounce back, some players aren't. I just don't think Saquon's one of those people. So you hate to see it, but I just don't think he's that good anymore. And I think they'll be able to get the W there. Then they're going to go on a streak of losing here. Just L, 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 and another L, and another one. Yeah, not looking very good for them. Let's just go through them quickly, I guess. Broncos, Raiders, Chiefs, Ravens, Titans, and Cowboys, I think, should all be very self-explanatory. But a more interesting one would be the Lions, who they could maybe beat. Maybe. First overall pick, Trayvon Walker is going to go up against Aiden Hutchinson. Should be a very fun game, but I think the Lions are going to be a very decent team this year. I think there's potential that they could maybe make a playoff run. Maybe. That's a little bit of a sneak peek for the NFC North video, which we will get to in the future. Then they got the Chiefs, the Jets and the Texans next, and I think they're going to get W's against both of them. They're still a young team who could play against other young teams like that. I think they'll be able to beat them. They could maybe lose to the Texans, and they could lose both. When you're a bad team, you could lose both games that are winnable or win both. You just don't know with bad teams. It's kind of hard to predict. The Jets could beat them by like 30, and I honestly would not be surprised. The Texans could beat them by 50, and I also wouldn't be surprised. It's just kind of tough to predict when you're seeing two bottom feeder teams go up against each other because, truthfully, if I'm looking at the schedule, outside of like those 3 W's that they have, excluding the Colts, every team they have against is either mediocre or a playoff contender. So, not going to get that many games from the Jaguars where they are the favorite or are on equal terms as these other teams. And then they're going to close out on an L against the Titans because the Titans are the Titans. And the Jags don't have any kind of historical edge like they do against the Colts, giving them a record of 4-13 on the season. Looking at their floor. They could get swept by the Texans and lose to the Jets. So 15? Not really much lower than 4-13. Honestly, I don't know if that'd be a bad thing for them or not, because they'd get a first overall pick again, most likely. So who knows? But I think they would for sure beat the. I think they'll still beat the Giants or the Giants and the Colts. Best case scenario, though, could see a W against the Lions and potentially a sweep against the Texans. So I think, and also win against Washington, potentially. So their best case scenario I see is 7-10, which I think will be a very good year for them, considering that they have a lot of question marks going into the year. We don't know how Christian Kirk is going to play. We don't know how Zay Jones is going to play. Brandon Scherff didn't have the best season, but he's definitely a good veteran for them to sign. So we'll just have to wait and see. It should be very fun watching them play, though. I always love watching young teams play. Let's just hope that Doug Peterson is a much better coach this time around than he was at the end of his tenure with Philly. Let's move on next to the Texans. The Texans. All right. Texans are a very underrated team to me. And you're going to see in a little bit. I don't see them being very good, but I see them as a much more contender of a team to make the playoffs at least than the Jaguars. Let's just get straight into it. Let's just, you see the acquisitions. I kind of want to just get into this because I want to move on to the next team. Because although I think the Texans I don't think the Texans are very interesting, despite them being underrated. I don't think they're very interesting. So I don't really want to give them too much coverage than they really need. So let's get started. Yeah, 2 pretty hard games right there to start off the season. Maybe pull one away from the Colts. Maybe, but I don't think so. The Broncos, obviously, they're extremely outclassed, and they don't have any historical context towards that team, so I think they'll probably get smoked over there. But then you got the Bears. I think that's where they get their first W. The Bears are bad. I don't know, outside of Darnell Mooney, I don't know who Justin Fields is going to throw to. I don't know who's going to protect Justin Fields. I don't know what's going to happen there. Yeah, the Bears are pretty bad. I don't know what they're going to do. Their defense lost so many pieces. I'm very worried for the Bears. Very, very worried. Then they go on the road to play, they go back home to play the Chargers. They're going to lose that one, although, got to remember, they did beat the Chargers last year, so I actually do think that there's a chance they could pull out that game. But at the same time, when you get J.C. Jackson and Khalil Mack, those are two pretty, just a little bit, kind of, they're decent role players, they could maybe propel your team to Super Bowl contention. Just 2 decent role players. Probably enough to definitely put you over the hump against the Houston Texans. Then they go on the road to play the Jags. They should be able to get the W there. I don't really, when it comes to bottom feeder teams, I don't care who's at home and who's on the road, because they're bottom feeder teams. Anyone can win. When they feel motivated to play and beat those teams, they might be able to win. It just depends on who wants it more. Then they got their bye week, and after the bye week, they come on the road to play the Raiders, Titans, Eagles. Very tough stretch. Very tough stretch of losses. Raiders outclassed, Titans outclassed, Eagles outclassed. Out of all those 3 teams they could beat the most, probably the Raiders, but even still, that's still a bit of a stretch. I think the Raiders got them by at least 30, so, yeah. And then they got the Giants. I think it's a W. The Giants are not very good. Giants are a pretty bad team. I've already discussed why. Then they got the Commanders, which I think should be a much more interesting of a game, and I think it should be a W. The Texans, I think, are definitely have more of a fire than Washington does because they're a lot younger. Washington is definitely a young team for sure, but they've had their core for a couple years now, at least 2 seasons, especially the defense, who didn't perform very well last year. So I think just this team could maybe catch a little fire in the bottle for that one game and win that game by like a field goal or something. Then they got the Dolphins, Browns, Cowboys, Chiefs, and Titans. Yeah. Sorry, I don't see that happening. They could maybe... I don't know how long the suspension would be. I'm pretty sure that it would already be over if Deshaun Watson is, for whatever reason, still suspended from the Browns. Maybe they win because they did almost beat them last season. Maybe, but I don't think so. All the other games, I think, are locked as L's. Then you got another interesting one to end out this, or 2 more interesting ones to end out the season. You got the Jags, who I think they could for sure beat, but I'm going to give them the loss here because I think it'll be a season sweep. They're both very similarly talented teams, although I think I would take the Texans over the Jaguars. But to end the season, they got the Colts. Much more interesting of a game to me because I actually think that the Texans play particularly well in the last games of the season. And they did last season against the Titans. I think Lovie Smith is a great coach. I've been seeing lots of interviews with him. I think he's going to be great. I'm giving them the W here. I think they're going to end the season knocking out the Colts just like the Jags did last season of playoff contention. You'll see when we get to the Colts predictions here in a moment. Giving them an overall record of 5-12. Is it absolutely amazing? No, but I think a lot of people probably see them going like 3-14, something like that. And they could. Because speaking of floor, we'll go to floor. They could definitely lose to Indy. They could also definitely lose to Washington, and they could definitely get swept by Jacksonville. So yeah, they could go 2-15. That's their floor. In terms of ceiling, they could sweep the Jags. I think they could sweep the Jags. Honestly, I think that's all the games they could win, honestly. I don't really see them. I think they have a little bit smaller of a floor, but it's kind of tough. I'm trying to think. Like, they could actually, no, I'll say they could beat the Titans once to go to that 7-10 also, because they did beat them once last year. I really think they did. I don't remember. I need to look that up again. I believe they did beat them last year. So I will give them the same ceiling as the Jaguars. They both have the same. It's interesting because they both have the same floor and ceiling, but I have the Texans being a little better. It's very interesting, but it's just that's how close they are in terms of talent. I think both teams are very, in terms of young talent, have some decent young talent. If the Texans kept Philip Lindsay, I would have maybe given them a win against like the Browns, maybe the Raiders actually, maybe the Raiders, not the Browns. The Raiders maybe if they still kept Philip Lindsay, who when we get to the Colts here in a second, I want to talk about him. I'm gonna have a little segment about him because I love Philip Lindsay. So with that being said, let's get on to the Colts, who had a very interesting offseason. They got Matt Ryan via trade, Philip Lindsay and Stefan Gilmore and Nick Foles, just in case Matt Ryan doesn't work out. So if they make the playoffs, start Nick Foles basically, because you don't want Matt Ryan. Or if they somehow make the Super Bowl, put in Nick Foles because you don't want Matt Ryan starting the Super Bowl. So Colts, they had the most Pro Bowlers last year, lost to the Jags, let the Steelers into the playoffs. Don't know how they didn't make the playoffs, but they did have a very tough start to the season. They started off against I think it was the Seahawks when they were fully healthy in week 2, the Rams in week 1, and I forgot who it was in week 3. But they had a very tough start to the schedule. They started 0-3 last year, and they couldn't really catch up. They did obviously finish the season 9-5 in terms of their wins, but the hole they were in from the very beginning of the season was just too much for them to overcome. So, will they be in that hole this season? I don't think so. Although, I think they will be worse than last season. Let's get into it. Starting off against the Texans, I think that's a W. The Texans are inferior to the Colts. And as we mentioned before, they're going to probably lose to the Jags on the road. They usually always lose to the Jags on the road. Not a very easy game for them. Because, they just can't win in Jacksonville for some reason. Then they got the Chiefs at home. Very interesting game. Very, very interesting. But Mahomes usually plays well against the Chiefs. Against the Colts. So I'm going to give the Chiefs the win there. Although it is at Lucas Oil Stadium, the Colts, the Chiefs don't have that roaring home advantage that they do over at Arrowhead. But I think they'll still be able to go into Lucas Oil Stadium and get the W there. And then they got the Titans at home. We've already mentioned they should be able to get the W there. And then a more interesting game against the Broncos, who the Colts are definitely good, okay? But I do not think that they're ready to compete with teams like the Broncos and teams like the Chargers, as we'll see later on, or anything like that. I don't think they're ready for that. They're just not as talented. I highly, highly doubt they're going to use Philip Lindsay. I really want them to, because Philip Lindsay, if you guys don't remember, was a two-time 1,000-yard rusher. His first 2 seasons was a 1,000-yard rusher, and then he played 11 games in 20-whatever season, with his 3rd season with the Broncos. I played about 11 games. It wasn't even the full-time starter. And rushed for 500 yards and hasn't gotten a chance since. I hope they get to do that here, because if they do, I can see them beating teams like, we'll see later on, I guess. Getting on to the Jaguars at home, they should be able to get the W there. The Jags are not very good. And then on road against the Titans, lost. The Titans should maybe even sweep them, but I think it's going to be a split because the Colts, I feel like, they're improved, but their schedule is more difficult to me. So I think they're going to take a loss there. Then they got the Commanders and Patriots, so I think will both be W's. The Patriots are okay. The Commanders, not very good, but leaning towards okay, maybe just a little bit. It depends on how Carson Wentz plays. I think he's definitely an upgrade over Taylor Heineke, although Taylor Heineke himself was not that bad. Then they got the Raiders. Very, very good matchup for them. Very interesting, but I'm gonna have to give the Raiders the win there because the Raiders they're at the Death Star. And the Raiders, just to me, their offense is going to be able to overpower that defense, whereas the Colts' offense might have a little bit more struggle overpowering the defense. Because I feel like outside of Jonathan Taylor, the Raiders, with their upgrades they had on the secondary, I think they're going to be a little harder to throw on. So they're probably going to have to feed Jonathan Taylor, and the Raiders have more of a potent offense in general to me than the Colts do. And I think that'll be enough to outpower the Colts. Then they got the Eagles. That's another L. The Eagles are they're stacked, man. I think I could see them being around the number 2 or number 1 even in the NFC. They're very good. I really love what they did. It depends on how Jalen Hurts plays, but I think he's going to be solid this season, or at least good enough to get them to a really good record. Yeah, I think they'll be able to get the W there. Then they come back home to play, or they come back at home again. They stay home again to play my Steelers. I think that's a W for them. If we obviously just recently had the news of Stefan Tuitt retiring. I love Stefan Tuitt. I'm so sad he retired, but in terms of helping, of course that doesn't help our team win because he's very good defensive lineman, very good. Um, and not having that guy to help stop the run is going to hurt us because we were the worst team in terms of stopping the run last year. And we didn't really get much. We got DeMarvin Leal in the draft. I don't really know much about that guy, I'm going to be honest with you. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that Jonathan Taylor's going to run all over us, and we're going to lose. Then we got the Cowboys. Should be an L. I don't think that the Colts are good enough to go on those streaky wins against good teams. So it's more so just I don't see them. They could win that game. Like, it's a good matchup for them, but I just don't think they're good enough to go on streaks like that. A long time ago, I used to do my predictions based off who I thought was the better team. That clearly ended up not being the smartest decision because on paper, yeah, this team might be better, but you also want to look into matchups and things like that. You don't just pick who's the better player in general or who has a better career. You pick who has a better skill set. And I think the Cowboys have a better skill set than the Colts. Then they go back on the road to play the Vikings after their bye week. I think there should be a W because the Colts, although I said are not a streaky team, they obviously took an L and they had a bye week, so it's been a little while since they've won. And I think they'll be able to get a W there against the Vikings, who they do match up very well against. Jonathan Taylor versus Dalvin Cook should be very cool. Both of the teams are very similarly constructed. And in this case, I'm going to pick the better running back because both teams like running the ball a lot. So I'm going to pick the better running back than Jonathan Taylor. You never know, though. Dalvin Cook is that guy as well. Then they got the Chargers at home. There's going to be a loss. The Chargers are just too good. They're stacked. Khalil Mack and J.C. Jackson does that for you. And then they end off against the Giants and the Texans. As we mentioned before, they're going to lose to the Texans, so it's a spoiler for that. And they got the Giants. That should be a W, though. Overall, they're going to finish with this record of 8-9. That is my prediction for the Colts. I think they're extremely overrated. They had the most Pro Bowlers last year, still lost. Stephon Gilmore, not himself anymore. He's definitely not bad, but he's not nearly what he once was. Not a star player anymore, so I don't know. He could maybe have a resurgence with the Colts. You never know with them. But I don't think that's going to happen. Looking at best case scenario, I could see them beating the Raiders. I could definitely see them beating the Raiders. I could also see them maybe beating the Cowboys and definitely the Texans. So in terms of a ceiling, I could see them going around 11-6 is their ceiling. In terms of a floor, though, I could see them dropping it to the Steelers and the Patriots as well as the Titans twice. So that'd be, how many teams would that be? That'd be 3 teams, 3 more losses, and give them a floor of around 5-12. I don't think that's going to happen. They're far too talented for that unless injuries unfortunately strike them, which I hope they don't. I don't think they're going to hit 5-12. I think that's a bit too low of an expectation because they're definitely not that bad of a football team. They are, they're decent. They could make a push, and I wouldn't be surprised. But I just really think that Phillip Lindsay is a very good running back still, and I think that it's not even just really the Colts' fault. It's any team that uses him. It's other teams, if anything, making it seem like he's not good. Because if I'm being honest, if I saw them use, because they already have Nyheim Hines, so they have a really good running back tandem with Nyheim Hines, him, Phillip Lindsay, and Jonathan Taylor. Very good it's a very good set of backs. And if they used all 3 of those, they could have a top run game in the league outside of just Jonathan Taylor, but they're not going to. I think that could get them wins against the. I think that would be big in getting them wins against the Cowboys. I think that would be massive in getting them wins against the Titans and the Chiefs and things like that. Or overcoming their streak of losing to the Jags and getting a win against the Jags on the road. It's just, I don't know. It's not really their fault. It's mostly other teams who try to make it seem like, hey, he's not a good player when he, in fact, is a very good player. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that about Phillip Lindsay because I see not a lot of people give him a lot of his credit. He deserves it, but this is what it is. And with that being said, we have finished the AFC South predictions. Next up, you'll see the AFC North, and then we'll take a little bit of a break again, and then start the NFC. I don't know. I say out of all the divisions of the AFC, this team is probably the worst for sure. Excuse me, this division is the worst for sure. You could argue the AFC East as well, but I think they're more talented slightly. But yeah, with that being said, let me know what y'all thought down in the comments below. Did I get your team right or wrong? I don't care what y'all say. It's whatever. I'm down for debates in the comments below. I actually welcome that because I love talking football, in case you couldn't tell. And that's it. I'm signing off. I'll see y'all later. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll catch you on the next one.